Last time we talked about how RH climbed Luxury Mountain, but what happens when the view from the top isn't what it seems? I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. Welcome back to Social Currency. This is the long-awaited second part of the Restoration Hardware series. In today's episode, we are going to talk about a handful of scenarios in the RH world that make us question what is actually going on behind the scenes. Based on the response that I got from the first video I put up on my social channels, people really want to understand what lies beneath the shiny veneer of restoration hardware. In many ways, this is a company that has created their own playbook and way of operating. Their price per earnings ratio is industry leading, and many of their financials seem to exist in a league of their own. Now, before we dive into the episode, a quick disclaimer. Everything you're about to hear reflects my own opinions based on publicly available information, so this is not fact beyond what has been publicly reported. This episode is for informational and entertainment purposes only. This is not investment advice nor a statement of fact beyond what's been publicly reported. So last time, we set the context for Restoration Hardware's rise. We walked through the genius and the audacity of Gary Friedman's transformation of a sleepy little retail chain into this multi-billion-dollar lifestyle business. This is a company that sold not just furniture, but status. And here's the thing about climbing Luxury Mountain. What looks like solid marble from afar often has cracks running right through it. And it's the CEO's job to ensure that those cracks don't keep spreading. And ultimately, it's also the CEO's job to fix them. Yet, due to industry shifts, the sweeping tariffs, the high interest rates, and the slowest housing market in decades, the foundation beneath the mountain has been starting to shift. So today we're going to peel back the layers. And to inform this episode, there are so many sources that I pulled from, but two specific ones were particularly informative and helpful. First, a firm called Hunterbrook has done a very thorough investigation on RH, and I encourage anyone who's listening to this episode to go check them out. And second, there's also Matt McClintock. Matt is an analyst who has fantastic coverage of RH's business, and he's been following RH's filings for years. So today, we are going to talk about the international expansion that thus far has not lived up to expectations, the lawsuits and creative controversies that shadowed the brand, the over $100 million investment into building a luxury ecosystem in Aspen, and the personal luxuries, the jets, the yacht, and the guest house penthouse of it all. We'll even look at why Warren Buffett, yes, the Warren Buffett, walked away from RH a few years after originally investing in it. If part one of this podcast was about vision, part two is about consequence. This is the story of how cracks started forming in the beautiful illusion and how Gary Friedman's decisions turned RH from a retail success story into a case study of overreach. So let's start with RH's grand vision of expanding overseas. When RH announced it was expanding internationally, Gary Friedman described it as the next chapter in the climb up Luxury Mountain. He wanted to take the RH experience global, to bring American-scale luxury to cities like London, Paris, and Munich. And on paper, it made sense. If other luxury companies could sell their products around the world, why couldn't RH build physical stores internationally too? But here's what actually happened. In 2023, RH opened its highly anticipated RH England, a 73-acre estate at Aynhoe Park, just outside of Oxford. The property looked like something out of a period film. There are sweeping lawns, candlelit dining rooms, and a courtyard that is lined with limestone columns. It was meant to be the symbol of arrival, a declaration that RH had become a global luxury brand finally. But what it really became was a museum. Because while people showed up to take photos of the star-studded opening event, and to name drop, there were guests like Sydney Sweeney and Ellen DeGeneres there, very few showed up to buy furniture over the course of the next year. And one of the core parts of this problem is that the RH model depends on gigantic, dramatic pieces that don't actually fit inside of many European homes. American luxury is about scale, sprawling floor plans, wide hallways, 14-foot sofas. But European luxury is about refinement, narrow staircases, curated spaces, and RH furniture does not translate there the same way it does in the US. Within months, analysts began calling it an overreach. The building itself might impress, but it came in lower than their initial projections. In Gary's Q2 letter to the shareholders, the company stated that the gallery is expected to reach approximately $37 to $39 million of demand in 2025. However, in their Q2 2022 call before the gallery opened, Gary projected that the England gallery would do $50 to $250 million in year one. Now, the store has been around for over 2 years at this point, and the same thing has actually happened elsewhere too. RH expanded with 2 stores in Germany in 2023. RH quietly took an $18 million impairment on this expansion. They started shipping inventory back to the US and stated that they were not going to renew these leases. Gary had promised that RH's global rollout would elevate the brand to new heights. Instead, it exposed how fragile the brand really is outside of the US. Because luxury doesn't always scale. What feels aspirational in California can feel out of place in other places. However, in September, RH did expand to Paris with what is objectively a gorgeous new gallery. In fact, in the Q2 shareholder letter, Gary spoke about how exquisite the Paris store was for one full page of the 6-page letter. And this is a direct quote from the letter. While RH Paris may not sound like a retail store, it's not meant to be. It is an authentic expression of the RH vision and design ethos. It is a global destination designed to manifest dreams, generate desire, and inspire an elevated and elegant way to live. And I do have to say, Gary really does have a way of selling this vision of luxury. But one more thing I want to add about the Paris opening is a finding from Matt McClintock. He recently came out with a Substack post about the Paris opening, and he made 2 very interesting comments. The first is about the fact that Gary was very focused on the foot traffic into the Paris gallery during the opening week. And he made it sound as if the foot traffic was all organic because of this pent-up demand for the location. However, Matt shared that it also happened to be Paris Fashion Week at the same time of the opening. So there were significantly more people in Paris, and this opening naturally had many of the same people who were attending Paris Fashion Week to walk through the RH doors. And second, the Paris gallery has multiple restaurants, yet the Google reviews of these restaurants are shockingly low. As of this taping today, one of the restaurants has a 3.2 out of 5 rating and the other has a 3.6 out of 5 rating. And one of the common themes you can find in the reviews of both RH Paris restaurants is that the staff largely does not speak French, which in France is a huge no-no. French people famously want to be spoken to in French, not English. So this seems like another potential oversight by management or the staffing of the restaurant. So now let's move on to our next topic, which is the Warren Buffett situation. Specifically, let's talk about the moment that Warren Buffett walked away. So when Warren Buffett invests in you, it is one of the biggest compliments on Wall Street. It means you've earned the trust of debatably one of the most disciplined long-term investors on earth. And in 2019, that's exactly what happened to RH. Through Berkshire Hathaway, Buffett bought more than 2.3 million shares of RH. And at the time, he did own a few other furniture companies. So Buffett's logic made sense. He saw a visionary operator with a defensible niche. RH wasn't just competing on price, but they were building a fortress of taste. The pandemic fueled a home renovation boom, and everyone wanted a piece of the RH aesthetic empire. But here's what Buffett is famous for. He doesn't fall in love with his investments. He falls in love with fundamentals. In 2023, Berkshire Hathaway disclosed that it had completely exited its RH position. Because this wasn't a short-term trade. Buffett had backed Friedman's long-term vision. But between RH's mounting debt, its collapsing cash reserves, and its restated financials, the story stopped adding up. RH borrowed over $2 billion right before interest rates spiked, and then used $2.3 billion of that to buy back its own stock. Right around this time, Gary sold himself more than $740 million of his personal shares and Buffett's exit came right around that time. So when a company's math changes mid-story, that's when value investors get nervous. And while we're talking about financials, there's also RH's cash balance. It's been falling considerably over the past 2 years. So when Buffett left, it wasn't just a sale, it was potentially a signal that the story was getting harder to believe. RH's empire still looked beautiful from the outside, but behind the scenes, the numbers were telling a different story: ballooning inventory and a CEO with a growing list of vanity projects. It's the oldest story in luxury, really, the moment when brilliance turns into hubris. Because the higher the brand climbs, the more it starts believing it's untouchable. And that's when the lawsuits start piling up as well. For a brand that built its empire on taste, Restoration Hardware has an uncanny knack for attracting lawsuits about who really came up with that taste in the first place. Because behind the chandeliers and marble tables, there's a long-running question: where does RH's creativity end and someone else's begin? So let's start in Australia. In 2019, an Australian lighting designer named Christopher Boots accused RH and a British furniture maker of stealing one of his original designs. It was this beautiful cascading glass light fixture that was featured in RH's modern collection. Boots had created it years earlier, and after seeing a strikingly similar version appear on RH's website and in its showrooms, he sued them. His claim was simple: RH wasn't inspired by his work, they decided to replicate it. Per his account, RH had allegedly reached out to him to ask to collaborate, and he declined. Yet RH came out with a shockingly similar lighting fixture with this other British designer after he declined. So this whole situation tapped into the larger conversation that's been following RH for years: its so-called curation model. You see, RH doesn't design every piece from scratch. It often works with outside artisans, suppliers, ateliers, blending those influences into the world of RH. And then there was Arhaus, one of RH's biggest competitors in the high-end furniture space. This year, Arhaus sued RH, claiming that its chief merchandising officer, a former Arhaus executive named Lisa Chi, left the company and brought confidential information with her. The lawsuit alleged that she shared Arhaus's trade secrets. While Arhaus eventually dropped the claims against RH itself, the case against Chi continues. Still, the story sticks because it wasn't the first time RH had faced this kind of accusation. Yet, ironically, RH sued Crate & Barrel in 2017 over a similar issue, where key executives from RH went over to Crate & Barrel. Now, these lawsuits may not have broken the company financially, but they chipped away at the narrative that RH was a pure creativity house. Instead, they suggest something else: that maybe the brand's true genius wasn't in making beautiful things, but in marketing other people's beautiful things better than anyone else. And that pattern of appearances outpacing reality keeps showing up in its financials and its projects and its leadership. So next we're heading to Aspen, where Gary Friedman's vision of living the brand went from a luxury concept to a sprawling and very expensive project with a perpetually shifting completion date. Aspen wasn't just another store launch. It was supposed to be the future of the company, the physical embodiment of RH's next act, experiential living. Gary's idea was bold. He wanted to create an entire RH ecosystem in Aspen: an RH guest house, an RH bathhouse and spa, an RH restaurant, even RH branded homes you could buy. So you could actually live in a fully branded Restoration Hardware universe. And according to Airmail's reporting, RH spent over $100 million acquiring and developing several properties in Aspen, including a cluster of high-end residential sites and an old hotel project called the Boomerang Lodge. It was meant to be an architectural showcase for the RH lifestyle. But here's the problem: we haven't seen much progress towards realizing this vision. Construction delays, cost overruns, and community pushback turned the Aspen dream into a slow-moving saga. One property sat idle for years, while others became the subject of local complaints. And as of 2025, the projects are still unfinished, and they actually decided to sell off one of the properties earlier this year. The irony here is that Aspen was supposed to prove that RH could actually evolve beyond retail, that it could someday become the Hermes of homes. But now it's become an eyesore to many of the Aspen local residents, and there seems to be a fair amount of negative sentiment towards the project, especially by the locals. It does seem like they are prioritizing the build out of the gallery location, and this property does have a building permit, so maybe this is the first property that they'll open. And for a company with a dwindling cash supply, this Aspen build out comes with a hefty price tag. But we're not just talking about the land and properties here. There are also other expensive assets we're talking about. There are planes, yachts, and penthouses too. When you dig into Restoration Hardware's most recent proxy filings, one thing becomes very clear. This is a company making some questionable decisions about how it manages and justifies its expenses. So let's start with the New York Guest House. This was one of Gary Friedman's big swings, a hotel that was described as the physical manifestation of the RH brand. It's an ultra-exclusive property perched above RH's Meatpacking District Gallery, complete with a private rooftop restaurant and 24-hour butler service. Now, the crown jewel is a penthouse suite called The Residence, and per their website, it starts at $15,000 a night. And a really interesting update here is that ever since I came out with my first social media video, the travel and leisure article that I screenshotted in that video calls the suite his personal penthouse. And that article is now mysteriously missing online. There is a version of this article that is live, but it's on the Travel and Leisure India site. And what do you know? The whole part about it being his personal penthouse has been taken out of the article. But don't you worry. I found another article on Harper's Bazaar from 2022 that also calls it his personal penthouse. So now if that page also mysteriously goes missing, I think we will all really know what happened there. But according to RH's proxy filings, Gary reimbursed the company a total of $184,000 for staying there across all of fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024. So doing the basic math on that, this means that over the course of 2 years, he would have only stayed there for around 12 nights, which to me seems very unlikely. It's possible. It is possible, but unlikely. And it raises a simple question. How much is the company actually recouping from these types of personal uses, and how are those rates determined? Next up, there is the RH3 yacht. In fiscal year 2024, RH disclosed that Friedman paid approximately $311,000 to charter the yacht. Now, the funny thing is that he did an interview in Forbes where he says verbatim, "I am not a boat guy. I get seasick." But Gary is spending a lot of time on that yacht. And here's the kicker. No one knows if this yacht has actually ever been used by anyone outside of the company. So it's supposed to be available for charter, but who else is chartering it? Hunter Brook identified several yacht trips that Gary personally has taken in the past 4 years, including to European destinations like the French Riviera and Mykonos. So we know that Gary is using it for his vacations, but we can't tell if it's getting any use outside of that. And the corporate jets tell a similar story. In fiscal year 2025, Gary paid $176,000 for flights originally logged as business travel, but later reclassified as personal. And I have an honest question here. Why are there two corporate jets? There's RH1 and RH2. Both of these are corporate jets. And if you look at the Architectural Digest piece, they did a whole spread that featured these jets, and these jets are immaculate. But for company assets, I don't think it's a great look, especially if they aren't being chartered by anyone but the CEO and his connections. And all of this points to a deeper governance issue, not about Gary Friedman personally, but about how RH structures oversight and accountability. When a company owns assets like yachts, aircrafts, and luxury properties, it's expected to have tight internal controls around their use. Instead, what we're seeing are post hoc reimbursements, gray areas in classification, and auditors catching missteps a year later. It's not illegal, but it's sloppy, and that matters. Each of these decisions, the yacht, the jet, the guest house, reflect a company that's prioritizing aesthetic polish over operational precision. It's corporate theater, beautiful but increasingly expensive to maintain. And it's not the first time that RH's decision-making has raised questions about transparency. Back in 2019, RH quietly paid $50 million to settle a class action lawsuit against the company, Gary, and the CFO that accused the company of misleading investors. The case alleged that RH made false or exaggerated claims about its RH Modern line, that it overhyped future demand and concealed operational problems to keep its stock price inflated. At the heart of it all was a familiar pattern, a company selling a vision that did not quite line up with reality. Investors argued that RH executives had repeatedly told Wall Street that this launch was the most innovative and new concept in the world of home and design. But really, behind the scenes, supply chain issues and inventory delays were already weighing on the results. The complaint claimed RH's leadership knew the numbers weren't sustainable, but kept promoting a massive growth story anyway. RH ended up settling for $50 million, and of course, $50 million isn't catastrophic for a company of RH's size, but the settlement was less about the money and more about what it revealed, a pattern of overpromising, underdelivering, and then quietly cleaning up the mess later. It's the same playbook investors have seen before: big vision, big statements, and then a period of spin when the results don't match the rhetoric. And that's what makes the recent government's decisions, the personal reimbursements, the yacht, the reclassified flights, feel less like an isolated slip-up and more like part of a bigger cultural problem. Because RH's image has always been about perfection. Perfect lighting, perfect furniture. But behind that perfection is a company that's repeatedly found itself paying to make its problems disappear. You can only do that for so long before investors start to question whether the story is stronger than the strategy. And that brings us to the bigger picture, the through line that connects all of this: the overexpansion, the lawsuits, the governance issues, the $50 million settlement. RH has built one of the most beautiful brands in the world. Its stores feel like museums. Its products have become synonymous in many circles with elegance and wealth. But somewhere along the way, the company started managing its image more carefully than its operations. And that culture always starts at the top. RH operates more like a luxury house that's privately held, yet it is definitely a public company now, and that means it answers to its shareholders. Lately, its decisions, from the way that it communicates to how it allocates capital, feel designed to impress, but not to perform. Ultimately, investors, employees, and customers might be willing to buy the dream for a while, but they won't stay forever if they start to feel like the dream is the only thing that's holding the company together. That, my friends, is a wrap on today's episode. I hope you found this restoration hardware deep dive interesting, and please message me with your thoughts, or if you're watching this on Spotify or YouTube, please drop me a comment on this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. I've been wanting to launch this show for so long. I can't tell you how excited I am to do this, and how thrilled I am that you're actually here listening. It means the world to me. If you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast, because it massively helps to support the work I do to bring the show to life. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks, and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, which is linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen. Social Currency is produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.